It's terrible that after 50 years it is behind closed doors.
The decision did not arrive with shouting, ceremony, or warning. It came with a signature. In this dramatized royal story, Charles stripped Camilla of the titles and ceremonial standing that had defined her place beside him, then transferred the newly vacant status and responsibilities to Princess Sophie. For everyone inside the palace, the meaning was unmistakable. This was not a temporary adjustment. The king had redrawn the hierarchy of his own household. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles read the final page once more, lowered the document, and placed his pen beside it without speaking. The royal directive, a formal written order used here to define changes in household roles and privileges, removed Camilla's senior ceremonial position and reassigned key duties to Sophie. That mattered because her standing had taken years to build. Acceptance had come slowly, and Charles himself had once defended the place she now seemed to be losing. Sophie received the news separately and froze. She had not asked for the elevation, and she understood at once that accepting it would make her the visible symbol of another woman's fall. The trusted confidant asked whether the decision was final. When told that the monarch had already signed, she sat back in stunned silence, aware that duty and loyalty were about to collide. Camilla reacted differently. She read the short notification behind closed doors, then asked only one question. Had Charles approved the exact wording? The answer was yes. The queen consort's disbelief hardened into something colder, because the deepest wound was not the loss of ceremony itself. It was the discovery that the king had made the decision without confronting her first. The order went further than a title. Ceremonial precedence, the formal ranking that decides who stands, enters, or appears before whom at official events, shifted toward Sophie. Certain patronage responsibilities and privileged briefing access moved with it, making the transfer impossible to dismiss as symbolic. The new structure had teeth, and everyone involved could feel it. Charles had therefore done more than redraw a chart. He had dismantled part of the position he once fought to protect, elevated Sophie into a role she never sought, and left Camilla facing a loss she never expected. The palace could absorb a document. Whether the people inside it could absorb the consequences was another matter entirely. But the document explained only what Charles had done. To understand why it cut so deeply, the story now had to move toward the three people trapped inside its consequences, before everything changed forever. For Camilla, the order was not simply a reduction in status. It felt like the removal of a future she believed had finally been secured. For Sophie, the elevation carried almost the opposite burden. She had been handed something powerful enough to damage relationships she had spent years protecting. And between them stood Charles, carrying the weight of a decision that was already changing the people closest to him. Sophie understood that immediately. Her influence had grown through consistency, discretion, and years of dependable royal work, not through an open pursuit of rank. Camilla's place had been built very differently, through a long and difficult journey toward public acceptance and proximity to the crown. That contrast mattered because the transfer now looked like more than a change of duties. It looked like the king was making a judgment about which kind of loyalty he trusted most. Sophie turned to Prince Edward in private and told him she did not want anyone believing she had asked for Camilla's place. Edward listened carefully before answering that refusing the king could create an even greater crisis. He reminded her that royal duty sometimes meant accepting responsibility precisely when it was uncomfortable. She understood the point, but the answer gave her no relief. Camilla sat alone after dismissing an aide and read the notification again. She had already absorbed the loss itself. What remained harder to accept was the silence before it. Charles had defended her for years, stood beside her through criticism, and helped secure the position she now watched slipping away. Yet when the most important decision about that position was made, he had not confronted her first. Charles knew exactly why that detail cut so deeply. The monarch had not chosen Sophie because she had challenged Camilla or demanded more power. He had chosen her because she represented reliability without rivalry, and because her record suggested she could carry difficult responsibilities without turning them into personal competition. That choice said something painful about what he now believed the monarchy needed. Sophie then discovered something even more unsettling. The revised schedules, ceremonial arrangements, and preliminary briefing papers had been prepared before she was informed. These were not hurried notes created after an emotional argument. They showed planning. They showed sequence. Most importantly, they showed that Charles had been moving toward this decision long before anyone outside his closest circle understood what was coming. That realization changed everything. Camilla's anger could no longer be explained as shock alone, and Sophie's discomfort could no longer be treated as temporary. Charles had not reacted in a moment. He had prepared. And if the king had prepared, then something had happened earlier. One private confrontation strong enough to turn years of tension into a point of no return. The answer lay there, in the moment when unease finally became decision. Every palace rupture has a moment people remember differently afterward. In this story, it came during preparations for a major state reception, when an argument over ceremonial authority stopped being an argument about protocol. Charles entered the conversation expecting resistance. He left believing something far more dangerous had surfaced. Loyalty, authority, and royal duty were no longer pulling in the same direction. Charles had been reviewing plans for the reception for days. The event required decisions about precedence, hosting duties, and which senior royals would represent the crown during its most important moments. Precedence meant the formal order deciding who takes priority during official appearances, and even small changes could carry enormous symbolic weight. Sophie had been given a larger role because of her experience with visiting delegations and public engagements, placing her duties closer than ever to responsibilities Camilla believed belonged naturally to her own office. Camilla objected during a private planning meeting. She asked for one major hosting assignment to be returned to her and argued that allowing Sophie to take it would weaken the Queen's standing in public. Charles refused. The king told her the decision had been made because the trusted confidant was best placed to handle the responsibility, not because anyone intended to humiliate her. Camilla heard something else entirely. She reminded Charles how long it had taken to secure her place, and accused him of allowing others to chip away at a position he had once promised to defend. The Queen Consort's frustration was no longer about one reception. It was about whether years of acceptance could be undone piece by piece, while everyone called it administration. Charles closed the briefing folder. He told her the monarchy could not organize itself around protecting personal status, when duty required a different choice. Camilla answered that duty had suddenly become a convenient word whenever Sophie was given more room. The silence that followed mattered, because neither of them stepped back. Sophie knew nothing about the confrontation itself. Yet later that evening, Charles requested a full review of ceremonial responsibilities, patronages, and delegated authority attached to Camilla's position. Patronages were official links through which royals supported charities and organizations, while delegated authority meant duties the monarch allowed another family member to carry out on his behalf. The review showed him how much of the existing structure depended on personal assignment rather than permanent entitlement. That discovery changed his thinking. Charles realized he had more freedom to reshape the household than Camilla believed, and the argument had given him a reason to use it. Days later, he quietly requested the first draft of the order that would eventually strip away her standing. Camilla would learn soon enough that the decision had begun there, and when she understood that one private argument had become the trigger for something far larger, silence would no longer be possible. What began over one ceremony was about to become the confrontation neither of them could avoid. Camilla did not ask for a formal meeting. She walked directly into the private room where Charles was waiting, closed the door behind her, and placed the notification between them. No advisors stood nearby to soften the words. No ceremonial language remained to hide behind. For the first time since the order had been signed, husband and wife had to face what it really meant. Charles had expected this moment. He had deliberately kept aides outside, because turning the exchange into a formal royal meeting would only make the distance between them worse. Camilla understood that titles and duties could be changed, but this felt different. Sophie had not merely gained another responsibility, she had been placed directly into a space from which the queen consort had been removed, and that made the decision feel intensely personal. Camilla pushed the paper toward him. "You didn't reduce the role, you gave it to her." Charles looked at the document, but did not touch it. The king answered that he had transferred responsibility because the monarchy required certainty. He could no longer allow blurred lines over who held authority, who represented him, and who made the final call when duties overlapped. Camilla's anger sharpened. She accused him of rewriting years of loyalty in a single afternoon, as if everything she had endured to stand beside him could now be reduced to a signature. Charles struggled to keep his voice controlled. He told her the decision did not erase their marriage. It separated marriage from royal authority, because affection could not be allowed to settle every question of duty. Charles then told her something she had not expected. The disagreement over the state reception had been only one part of a much larger pattern. In their private conversation, he described repeated clashes over precedence, access, and final authority inside the working household. Precedence meant the formal ranking that decided who took priority during official duties, and he believed those disputes had begun damaging the clarity the crown depended on. Camilla stared at him and asked the question that had been burning beneath everything else. Had Sophie known? Had she helped shape the decision before the order was signed? Charles answered immediately. Sophie had known nothing until the structure was already complete. The trusted confidant had not plotted for the position, asked for it, or helped remove anyone from it. That answer changed the direction of Camilla's anger. Sophie might be the person receiving the power, but she was not the person who had taken it. Charles was. Camilla left without reconciliation, but she left understanding something far more unsettling than before. The king had not acted impulsively, and Sophie had not engineered her rise. The true source of the decision sat behind that closed door, backed by a structure already moving into place. Because behind the personal confrontation waited a colder reality. Charles had built his choice to survive the emotions surrounding it, and the machinery that would make it permanent was already beginning to turn. Royal power rarely looked dramatic once the emotion was stripped away. It moved through revised schedules, altered precedence sheets, sealed instructions, and names quietly shifted from one column to another. While Camilla was still absorbing the personal humiliation of Charles's decision, Sophie was discovering its colder side. The king's order was already changing who represented him, who received briefings, and whose judgment carried weight when he was absent. Charles had structured the transfer through the authority of his own household, using appointments, ceremonial assignments, patronages, and internal precedents to reshape responsibility without turning the matter into a parliamentary battle. Internal precedents meant the order used inside the royal household to decide who took priority during official duties and appearances. That distinction mattered because it allowed the monarch to act quickly, and because it showed that his goal was not public spectacle, it was control. Sophie understood the pressure the moment her first revised briefing folder arrived. She opened it slowly and found responsibilities that had previously passed through Camilla's office, now placed under her name. The trusted confidant looked toward Edward and admitted that every page felt like evidence of somebody else's loss. He reminded her that the duties still had to be performed, but that answer did little to lighten the weight she felt. Charles noticed that burden as well. He told Sophie privately that she was not replacing Camilla as a person, and that he would not allow the transfer to be framed that way inside the household. The king said she was taking responsibility for areas the crown could no longer leave uncertain. His concern was continuity, and he trusted her because she already carried a heavy public workload without turning duty into personal competition. Sophie then asked the question no one else had dared to put so directly. Could the transfer ever be reversed? Charles answered without hesitation. He had signed the order precisely because he did not intend another period of ambiguity. The monarch wanted the family, the staff, and the wider institution to know where authority now rested. That answer removed the last illusion that this might be temporary. A revised order of participation for upcoming engagements began circulating through the household, confirming who would stand where, who would host, and who would receive which briefings. Staff could no longer treat the crisis as something private between Charles and Camilla. Camilla would feel the difference soon enough. Until now, the transfer had existed in documents, conversations, and revised instructions. But paper could still feel distant. Reality could not, and that reality arrived faster than anyone expected. When one ordinary royal engagement forced Camilla to watch Sophie step into a responsibility that had once come naturally to her. The true impact of losing power was not felt when the order was signed. It came later, when someone else answered the call that once came to you. At the first major engagement after Charles's decision, Sophie received the briefing, took the senior hosting position assigned by the king, and stepped into duties once associated with Camilla. That was the moment the transfer stopped feeling theoretical. Camilla entered the diplomatic reception already aware that the structure had changed. But awareness was different from experiencing it. Sophie had been instructed to coordinate the senior family presence alongside Charles, while staff followed new briefing channels and ceremonial precedents. Those channels were simply the routes through which official information and instructions moved inside the household. And changing them meant authority was now flowing through different hands. Camilla reached toward a briefing folder almost without thinking. An aide quietly explained that it had already been delivered to Sophie. She stopped, withdrew her hand, and said nothing. The gesture was small, but it carried everything she had been trying not to admit. The old pattern was gone. What once arrived naturally at her side now belonged somewhere else. Sophie noticed. She said nothing in the moment, but later she asked Charles whether there was a less humiliating way to put the changes into practice. The trusted confidant had accepted the responsibility, yet she did not want every new duty to become another public reminder of Camilla's loss. The king listened and answered that pretending nothing had changed would only stretch the pain out longer. Charles believed clarity was kinder than false comfort. If staff continued behaving as though the former arrangement still existed, every future correction would become another wound. The monarch had chosen a hard break because he thought uncertainty would damage both the family and the institution more deeply. Sophie understood the logic, but she could also see the human cost standing just a few steps away. Camilla felt that cost hours later. She declined a subsequent appearance linked to the transferred duties, giving no dramatic explanation and making no public protest. The refusal was enough to create quiet concern inside the household. Was she stepping away from one event, or beginning to withdraw from royal life more broadly? Camilla did not answer that question publicly. Instead, she requested a private meeting with Sophie. No Charles, no aides, no documents between them. Sophie hesitated when the request reached her. After everything that had happened, she expected accusation, anger, perhaps even a demand that she refuse what the king had given her. But when the two women finally met alone, the conversation moved in a direction neither had prepared for. The crisis had spent days being defined by titles, access, and authority. Now Camilla and Sophie had to decide whether those things would also define what they became to each other. There was no audience when Camilla and Sophie finally sat opposite one another. No king stood nearby to control the tone, and no aide waited outside the conversation to translate pain into careful language. Camilla had come expecting an explanation, perhaps even an apology. Sophie gave her neither. Instead, she said quietly, "I never wanted your place." Sophie had agreed to the meeting because silence was becoming dangerous. She knew resentment could harden into something much larger than the original dispute, especially now that every transferred duty carried emotional meaning. Camilla understood by then that the trusted confidant had not designed Charles's order, but understanding did not erase the connection. Every time Sophie moved forward, the queen consort felt herself being pushed backward. Camilla looked directly at her and asked whether she intended to enjoy being treated as the woman Charles trusted more. Sophie did not flinch. She answered that she intended to perform the duties properly and nothing more. The trusted confidant refused to turn the king's judgment into a personal victory, because she knew that doing so would transform service into rivalry. Sophie then admitted something Camilla had not expected. Every new responsibility made her feel guilty. Each briefing, each assignment, each ceremonial duty reminded her that another woman had lost something before she received it. The confession changed the room. Camilla's anger did not disappear, but it softened into sadness, because she finally understood that Sophie was carrying consequences, not celebrating them. Sophie pushed the conversation further. She offered to protect several charitable projects closely associated with Camilla, rather than absorb them into her own public identity. Those projects mattered, because they represented years of personal work and relationships, not merely royal assignments. The trusted confidant wanted a clear boundary. She would accept duties Charles required her to perform, but she would not pretend that another woman's history now belonged to her. Camilla heard the offer and made a decision of her own. She would not fight Sophie publicly. She would not undermine the new arrangement, leak resentment through private channels, or turn the family into competing camps. The queen consort would face whatever remained of her role on her own terms. That choice did not reverse Charles's order. It did something almost as important. It stopped the private conflict from becoming the family war everyone feared. Sophie left the meeting, still carrying responsibility. Camilla remained wounded, but no longer focused on the wrong enemy. For the first time since the crisis began, the two women had drawn a line between personal pain and public duty. But beyond the palace walls, no such understanding existed. The changed hierarchy was about to become visible, and once Britain saw it, the story would no longer belong only to Charles, Camilla, and Sophie. By morning, the decision that had moved through private rooms and sealed briefings belonged to everyone. Television panels argued over what it meant. Commentators tore apart every detail. Crowds gathered near royal residences, hoping to see the people at the center of it. But one image cut through all the noise: Sophie arriving for her first major appearance under the new arrangement, composed and unsmiling, while Camilla's absence said more than any formal statement could. Public opinion split almost immediately. Some saw Charles's decision as a personal punishment aimed at the woman beside him. Others believed the king had deliberately rebuilt the working structure around royals he considered more dependable. That debate mattered because the monarchy survives on more than internal decisions. It also survives on public belief, and now every change in duty, appearance, and status was being interpreted as evidence of something larger. Sophie became the unexpected center of the story. She had attacked no one, issued no triumphant statement, and made no attempt to present herself as a victor. Yet every new responsibility placed her directly beside the controversy. The trusted confidant understood that one careless smile, one overly confident gesture, could be twisted into celebration of Camilla's fall. Charles watched the coverage privately and grew more troubled as the headlines sharpened. The king had tried to separate personal affection from institutional authority, but the public conversation had done the opposite. It turned the decision into a story about marriage, loyalty, and rejection. What he had designed as a structural correction was now being judged as an emotional betrayal. Camilla saw Sophie's image dominating the coverage and kept her word. She made no public challenge, offered no bitter response, and refused to feed the conflict through private channels. The queen consort knew that silence would not restore what she had lost, but breaking it recklessly could destroy the fragile understanding reached behind closed doors. Then one fictional newspaper front page captured the entire morning. Outside a London newsstand, the headline read, "The King Chooses Sophie," placed beside photographs of Charles, Camilla, and Sophie. Passers-by stopped, pointed, and photographed it while nearby cameras recorded the reaction. In a single moment, the private reshuffle became a public symbol. At Buckingham Palace, the response grew louder when Sophie arrived for an official engagement. The crowd reacted audibly, but she acknowledged them only briefly and moved on without any gesture that could be mistaken for triumph. The trusted confidant had already decided what kind of power she wanted to carry. Public opinion would keep arguing about winners and losers. But beyond the headlines, Charles, Camilla, and Sophie had reached the final point of the crisis. When the noise finally began to fade, only one judgment remained: the human verdict left behind after title, status, loyalty, and marriage had all been tested at once. In the end, there was no dramatic reversal. Charles did not restore what he had removed. Sophie did not surrender what she had been asked to carry. Camilla did not launch the rebellion many expected. The decision survived because all three eventually faced the same uncomfortable truth. Royal status could be transferred in a moment, but dignity was decided by what someone did after the transfer. Charles left the restructuring intact. Sophie's new ceremonial responsibilities remained in place, while Camilla kept only the personal and charitable roles specifically preserved after the change. That mattered because the monarchy now operated under a clearer separation between private relationships and working authority. The king had drawn that line when he signed the order, and after everything that followed, he refused to erase it, simply because the consequences were painful. Camilla finally sat with Charles again, without folders, advisors, or formal language between them. The queen consort told him that losing status had hurt, but discovering that he had stopped trusting her judgment before saying it aloud had hurt more. The king listened without interrupting. He did not apologize for the institutional decision itself, because he still believed the crown required clarity, but he did apologize for allowing silence to replace honesty. Camilla accepted that distinction. She understood that their marriage had survived, but it had changed. Affection no longer carried the illusion that it guaranteed authority, and Charles could no longer pretend that protecting the monarchy would always mean protecting her position. The queen consort had lost something real, yet she also gained control over how she responded to that loss. Sophie made her own choice. She refused to turn elevated status into personal grandeur, avoided treating new responsibilities as trophies, and carried the work with the same restraint that had defined her rise. The trusted confidant's behavior became the clearest explanation for why Charles had selected her in the first place. She treated increased standing as additional responsibility, not vindication. Camilla also refused to compete for restoration. She did not launch a campaign against Sophie or reopen the conflict in public. By stepping away from that fight, the queen consort recovered something no royal order could grant or remove: control over the manner in which she left the struggle behind. Charles had preserved the structure of the crown, but the emotional landscape of his household would never return to what it had been. Sophie gained responsibility without triumph. Camilla lost status without losing dignity. The king kept authority, but he also accepted the personal cost of using it. The signatures remained, the new hierarchy stood, and the conflict ended not by restoring the old order, but by accepting the new one. Sophie carried the responsibility. Camilla relinquished the fight. Charles lived with the cost of choosing the crown when keeping everyone happy became impossible. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.